Good Yontif, everybody. Good Yontif. There's a story that's told about the aftermath of the Shoah when there were some children who, thank God, had survived, and many of them had survived because they were hidden away through the course of the war in monasteries. So there were Jewish children living there among the monks, pretending not to be Jewish. And after the war, many Jewish groups and humanitarian groups were devoted to trying to find those children and bring them back to their people, bring them back to their families, if there was any family left, to bring them back to some Jewish family somewhere. But there was an issue, because the children were scared. They were terrified, and if you asked them, "Are you Jewish?" they wouldn't necessarily want to say, "Yeah, I am," and you can understand why they wouldn't. They were taken so young, some of them, that they didn't even know what that meant to be Jewish necessarily, and the monks, not always helpful. The monks wouldn't always say who's Jewish, who's not. They wouldn't always tell the truth. So how do you know? How do you know which of these children are Jewish and which are not? Story reminds us that there was at that time a rabbi named Reb Lazer, and Reb Lazer himself, he had lost his own family, sadly, in Buchenwald, but still he was a righteous guy. He was strong in his faith. He didn't want to lose his strength as a Jew, and Reb Lazer actually devoted his life after the war to trying to uncover which of these children left were Jewish. And he had an idea. He went out and he bought an organ. An organ. You know why? Well, he would carry this organ, he would schlep it on his back as he walked throughout Europe from monastery to monastery, from town to town, and he would get there and he'd place the organ there on the ground, and all the children would gather, and he'd crank the handle out of that organ, and you know what tune he actually put in that organ? Kol Nidrei ve'asarei yadadadam. We just heard it. And then he'd watch. He would watch the faces of those children. He would see there were some who had a little interest, a little smirk. Those he knew he didn't have to worry about. They're not Jewish. But for others, he would play that tune, and he would watch, and he would see the tears beginning to well up in their eyes, and he would see the longing in their faces, and he would see the memories there, and in some he would even see a little spark of pride despite what they had been through, and then he knew that those were the Jewish children. And so from town to town, he would bring his organ, and the sound of Kol Nidrei could be heard, and it's recorded to history that Reb Lazer, through that act, was able to save, though he couldn't save his own, hundreds of Jewish children, reminding them of their faith and ensuring a Jewish future through them with the most moving melody we have in our faith, the one we just heard. Friends, I tell that story because, well, tonight, we are moved to remember who we are. We are moved through that most sacred melody on this most powerful evening to look within, and regardless of what our lives are like throughout the rest of the year, to feel deeply that sense wherever you're watching from. Ivri Anochi, I am a Jew. We remember. I want to speak about that feeling tonight and what it means in the year 5782, because when it comes to being a Jew in America, when it comes to Jewish pride in 5782, and when it comes to anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in America today, there's a storm. There's a storm that's raging. I'll remind you that on Yom Kippur tomorrow, we'll be reading the story of Jonah. What's the story of Jonah? It's the story of a prophet who is shaken up by this great storm. He's thrown into the sea. He finds himself in the belly of the whale, but beforehand that storm is shaking the boat, and he's terrified until the captain of the ship turns to him and says, "Jonah, who are you? Who are you?" And the only answer he has in that moment of a storm is, "Ivri Anochi, I am a Jew." It's that pride that he feels that changes the whole course of the story for him and helps him to face that storm ahead. We'll read about it tomorrow. Well, there's a storm out there too. There's a storm when it comes to anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in our country, and we better be Jonah. We better be able to say, Ivri Anochi, we better be able to hear that melody that calls out to us tonight from the depths of who we are and reminds us who we are, not just tonight, not just tomorrow, but if we're going to face that storm out there every day. I began as your rabbi. I'll never forget the date. Never forget it. It was May 15th. You know why I won't forget it? Because the storm was already raging. Because I began on May 15th, and it was just 5 days after hundreds of rockets had begun to fall on Eretz Yisrael from Hamas, bombarded Israel every single day throughout that period in the spring, just as I was starting here, my very first Shabbat actually. I was on the Bima, and we had a bar mitzvah. And I looked at that family with all the pride and all the joy that a rabbi needs to have, and a piece of my heart missing, knowing that that very Shabbat in Sderot, in Ashkelon, in the south of Israel, Jews holding services, holding a bar mitzvah, holding a bat mitzvah in a bunker, as they do. And you know, I hope, that in the days leading up to this service, those sirens going off still, as they do. So we gather tonight with some pride and a feeling of safety and security. Thank God, but we have to know that that's a luxury that our brothers and sisters in the south of Israel, they don't experience for many holidays, for any holiday really. When I began as your rabbi, that storm was raging, that storm of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And you know what? It's left us needing to hear now more than ever the melody of our people that'll wake us up so that we can stand a little taller and say, Ivri Anochi, I'm Jewish, with a little more pride this year. A lot has changed. A lot's changed in 2021. You've heard sermons already about anti-Semitism, about anti-Zionism. I'm sure of it. You've heard plenty over the years. That plague of hatred that began with Pharaoh in Egypt thousands of years ago, it's found its expression in a lot of pharaohs since then, a lot of them. But it's different. In 5782, it's changed. Because when it comes to anti-Zionism today and anti-Semitism today, it's not just the extremes. It's the mainstream in too many ways. It's becoming cool to hate the Jews again. It's becoming progressive and forward-thinking to hate the Jews again. When Cherry Garcia ice cream and fish food ice cream have joined that campaign to demonize the only Jewish state, it's not extreme. It's mainstream. When comedians like John Oliver on HBO, given a free pass to just joke casually using words without any consequence whatsoever, like Israeli apartheid, but they failed to say a single word, not a single word, about a terrorist organization like Hamas launching missiles week after week right up into this very day. Well, if he gets a free pass, we have a problem in this country. When celebrities, and we know there are many of them, prominent influencers who have access to millions of eyes and ears, they can put on a video online in an instant a tweet. Maybe you know that it was trending last year, the tweet #Jewish privilege. Despicable. And they can put that out there thinking it's forward thinking it's cool, and that tweet reaches the heart of a young person, or maybe 1,000, who have no clue what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, really, who have no sensitivity, who don't know about the horrors of the Shoah, and now they're inspired by that tweet and that ignorant hatred to go out and get to college and, God forbid, rip an Israeli flag off a dorm room wall because it's cool, because the BDS group on campus, on every campus, has given it that stamp of approval. We have a problem with that. And it's not just campuses. I hope you know the name Barry Weiss, everybody. Barry Weiss was a writer for the New York Times. She's a brilliant writer. She's a brilliant writer. I hope we can bring her here. I really do love her. But she found a culture at the New York Times that was so challenging for anyone who had even a shred of pride when it came to Israel and the Jewish state. She found a culture where anyone who stood up for Israel in any way would just be canceled out. So she left, and of course she still writes and speaks prolifically. She had a beautiful, beautiful session with the American Jewish Committee, and the title of that session was what stuck out to me. You know what the title was? Very recently. The mainstreaming of anti-Semitism. The mainstreaming of American anti-Semitism. So when a company like Ben & Jerry's, to use that big example of the summer, they have no problem selling their ice cream to countries with the worst human rights records you can imagine, but they decide to single out the one Jewish state on the planet, 2 Jews. It's not extreme anymore. It's mainstream. And I'm baffled by it. I'm baffled when they say, we're not anti-Semitic. Don't look at us. We're just standing up for our values. Can you tell me why then, in the aftermath of what we saw this summer and into the spring, in the aftermath of all of that conflict, which I don't even use the word conflict when it comes to Israel and Hamas. You have a democracy on the one hand and a terrorist organization bent on destruction and death on the other. There's no moral equivalency there. But they say still, Ben & Jerry's, don't call us anti-Semitic. We're just reporting what we see. Tell me why. As a result of pointing a finger at the Jewish state again and again and demonizing Israel again and again, we've seen, according to the ADL, close to a 500% since the summer increase in anti-Semitic attacks on Jews throughout the country. Little things. A swastika drawn, a student harassed for having a Jewish star necklace, a window of a synagogue broken. We're seeing this stuff. Tell me why it's not anti-Semitism then, or doesn't lead to anti-Semitism. When we had to read this summer a story of what happened just in Times Square, a few miles away, where Jews gathered there are getting harassed for wearing a kippah. I wear a kippah in Times Square. I wear it proudly. But I worry deeply about living in an America where hating Israel is so mainstream and people are so mixed up about what it means to hate Israel and hate a Jew. That line is so fuzzy that Kaylee has to tell me, or my parents have to tell me, you're going into the city, Jack? Better put a hat. Shame on the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism. If it's cool, if it's progressive, if it's supposed to be woke to hate Israel, if they think they're promoting peace and tolerance and creating a better world through that double standard, they have no clue. But it's worse than that, because they're fanning the flames of hatred and division and intolerance, and it's irresponsible and it's dangerous. And my friends, we have a lot of work to do in our community, in our little pocket of the world, to take a stronger stand. I certainly did not expect my first week to have to form an Israel Action Committee, to try to get some of us who care about Israel, who have a pride in who we are, to stand against that hatred out there. We had Abby Taub from AIPAC speak to us on Zoom. We went to a rally against anti-Semitism at the Nassau County Executive Building. We're going to be doing a lot more. A lot more. So if you hear that melody in your heart tonight that calls to you and says, Ivri Anochi, I am a Jew. I may not be the most religious. I may not be the one who comes to shul every single week, but you better believe I'm going to stand up for that no matter what. Well, then I hope you'll join us. And I hope you'll help us to make sure that TBT is always known among everything else we do as a beacon of strength for Jews right here, Jews throughout New York, and Jews throughout the world. It's not just standing against hatred, though. It's not just standing against bigotry and bias. We're standing for what's good and for what's true. I have to tell you, my heart breaks when I think about innocent Palestinians who are caught up in this conflict. And so I speak with all my strength against that death cult Hamas, because there are innocents. And my heart breaks for innocent Afghani women and children, Muslims who are caught in a culture of extremism. That's why I know that to be a Jew is not just to stand against hatred, to stand against terror and extremism. It's to stand for what's right. I'll leave you with a story. The most important story I've read in a couple weeks now. It just came across my desk. It just happened the last couple of days. It says so much about who we are and who we're supposed to be as a Jewish people. Article comes across my desk. I thank Joel Spielvogel for sending it. Who's the last Jew in Afghanistan? That's the article. The last Jew in Afghanistan. Did you know there was one Jewish person left in Afghanistan? Anybody? I see some heads. It was a thriving center of Jewry in the 19th century. 2021, there's one Jew left. Zebulon Simintov, living in Kabul. Entire life. Every other Jew in the country has the good sense at this point, get out. Kabul, not a place to be a Jew. And yet, for these years, he's courageously maintaining the last synagogue in the country out of his home, no minyan, obviously. Finally, after a lot of begging from the American Jewish community, now we're able to convince him, Zebulon, it's time. So he closes the window of his synagogue in his home. He's ready to escape, and actually just on Rosh Hashanah, thank God, he's able to escape. Here's what I want to leave you with. It was a very scary trip, I'm sure. But what I want to leave you with is who we are, what we stand for, not only against hatred and extremism, but for what's right. The last Jew in Afghanistan crosses the border. Is he thinking only about himself? Is the American Jewish community thinking only about rescuing him? No. 30 women and children, not Jews, crossing with him. Human beings who deserve a better life too. His neighbors had protected him for a lifetime. He saw an opportunity to help his neighbor's children, and he sure did. The last Jew in Afghanistan, he did a very Jewish thing. He acted like a Jew until his final steps out of that country. Think about the story I opened with. On the heels of the greatest storm our people ever faced, the Shoah, Jewish children were moved by that ancient melody of Kol Nidrei, and those children refused to give in to despair. They went on to move to Israel or the United States. They went on to become prize winners and scientists and discover new vaccines. Thank God. They faced a storm, but they faced it with courage and wisdom and righteousness. And some of us come from them, but in a deep way, we all come from them. So tonight, in 5782, in this year ahead, I hope we'll remember our story. That melody of Kol Nidrei that we heard, it's faded now in our ears. It's come and gone. Don't let it fade in your heart. Know who you are this year. There's a storm out there. Don't let it deter you. Say proudly in all the ways you can, and you know you must, Ivri Anochi, I am a Jew. Good Yontif, everybody. So we're going to move now